If you are one of the millions of Americans who cannot buy a house, you are not alone. According to the Wall Street Journal, the American housing market is fading further and further out of reach for the middle class and, above all, for the young. The past 3 years have been brutal for housing costs, driven by four factors: soaring house prices thanks to the Fed, soaring mortgage rates thanks to the Fed, soaring home insurance thanks to Congress, and just last week, a massive settlement by the National Association of Realtors that could slash commissions but could saddle buyers with even more costs. So how did we get here? The story begins with the Fed printing $6 trillion to bribe voters into lockdowns that sent inflation soaring, which took house prices along for the ride. Then to fight its own inflation, the Fed jacked up interest rates, setting mortgage rates from 3% to 7% today. Put them together and the average payment on a new mortgage doubled to nearly $3,000, which is almost half the median household income.
Hi everyone, this is Lad Dilgard. Welcome to another episode of Stand and Speak. That was Dr. Peter Onge just scraping the surface of the problems with rent and housing prices these days. Problems that were caused by the Fed, caused by the government, and lots of government. Today's fact of the day is that the average asking rent now, the average American renter pays $1,326 per month in rent. The average asking rent is $1,900. For single-family homes, that's $2,018, and a typical apartment is $1,659, according to worldpopulationreview.com for 2024. Now, this is driven by a number of factors I'm going to highlight here. We could go into depth a lot more on all of them, but we're just going to hit the highlights. But the key factor here is government and the problem with government. So there are a lot of factors that go into the cost to a homeowner or an apartment owner that factor into your rent. People think that, the landlord's just being greedy, or, that's really Wall Street driven. They're driving up margins. They're really breaking the backs of the working people. Well, when you make the costs to a landlord or a real estate investor more, they have to pass it through to somewhere in order to survive, let alone profit. Let's take evictions for a second. Watch this video on a eviction from real estate lawyer that was posted to X. Yeah, so this is how someone left a place when they took off. So these are damages. This is how tenants leave a place sometimes. And the cost of the repairs, the cost of the cleanup, that goes to you if you're a valid renter. You may follow all the rules, but these guys don't, and they drive up the cost for everybody. Look at that. I personally have had to clean up several places like this. The only repercussion is to file a lawsuit and try to collect money from them, keep their deposit. But still, it costs. That is something else. Here's another one. Here is a after eviction video from another post to X.
This person lived here for
This guy was there for 3 months.
Paid 1 month's worth of rent and acted so surprised when the sheriff showed up to kick him out.
Unbelievable.
Rents for $1,360. It's super cute. It has been renovated and destroyed by...
Look at that, brand new carpet.
Their dog chewed up the carpet in the bedroom. There is dog hair.
Holes in the wall.
And
I've seen this. I've had this happen at rental properties. After renovating the house, putting some TLC into it, cleaning it up, painting it, fixing, putting in new things, tenants like this, they leave it like this, like animals.
some people really do not deserve.
And then some of them asked for their deposit back, which is kind of funny.
From the dog. Guys, if you move into a nice apartment, please pay your rent.
Now, you may think, well, how do they get away with this? Well, the government protects them. The government protects people like that. And there's a commission in Ohio called the Ohio Civil Rights Commission, which allows tenants to hassle landlord with the backing of the government on alleging some kind of discrimination, whether it is emotional support animal, or race or gender or marital status or something like that. All the tenant has to do is allege discrimination, and a bunch of bureaucrats down at OCRC will try to hassle the landlord. And we're going to have a whole session, we're going to have a whole segment just on that. But the government looks out for people like that. They don't really look out for landlords too much. They look out for tenants who destroy property. That's driving up rents everywhere. So let's go into some other costs that go into housing costs that are passed on to tenants. Interest rates. Since 2020, interest rates for mortgages have gone from 2.5% to 3% to 7.5%. And that cost makes housing more expensive, and it makes rent more expensive. That is from the Fed, and that's from Joe Biden's spending blowout in 2021-22. Real estate taxes. So let's look at this chart on housing prices, the average home prices from Zillow. You see that yellow squares in there? So that's COVID spending blowout. So the country locked down because of this COVID thing, and we paid people money to stay home, and we dropped interest rates down to essentially zero. So what did that do to home prices? It jacked them up. So people could spend money, their government money, with low interest rates, and that means that this fixed amount of homes, because there wasn't a lot of homes being built back then, is driven up. So you increase capital, you limit supply, and you increase demand, and you have a 9.5% increase in 2020, 16% increase in 2021, and a 9.5% increase again in 2022. It's since leveled off, but still those prices are high, and they stayed high. That drives up rents. And so correspondingly, the cost to build went way up as well. Essentially, the components of a rental property is a loan, tax, real estate taxes, insurance, repairs, and probably utilities. All of those have gone up since 2020, and they've gone up in a big way. Real estate taxes in my area of Delaware County, Ohio, the values of the houses were reassessed, and 40 to 75% increases are what we saw on single family homes in Delaware County. Real estate taxes go up correspondingly to that. And they're up. This obviously varies according to where you're at in the country. It's going to be more expensive in California and less expensive in North Dakota. But still, as in the United States as a whole, real estate taxes have gone up. Insurance, according to a Fox article, home insurance since 2020 is up 38%. Again, that goes into your rental costs. Repair costs on labor, according to the Wall Street Journal, has gone up at least 40%. So if you're getting somebody to come in and put in a new cabinet, to fix a water leak, to fix an electrical outlet, that's up at least 40% since 2020, if you can find the labor. So the next segment is labor shortages, which drive up those costs as well. So not only has the price increased on the labor, but there's a shortage of skilled labor thanks to our ridiculous educational system that does very little for tradespeople. And then you have the repair costs from the material repair costs. So we all know that lumber went up, bricks went up. They skyrocketed during COVID, up 200 or 300%. And because of environmental regulations and a lot of other things, they're still high. They're not that high. But Home Depot and Lowe's and Menards prices have gone up substantially, somewhere between 25 and 50% since 2020. So the price to repair your home has increased, and the material to repair something that goes wrong has increased. That's passed on to the landlord, that's passed on to the tenant. And then there's the cost of evictions that we talked about. So for the longest time, the CDC prohibited any evictions. So the landlord had to keep people in a house or a unit and couldn't evict them. And they weren't paying rent, and they were damaging the place, and they weren't paying the water bill, and so on. And there was nothing you could do about it because the federal government stepped in. So that has since been rescinded thanks to the Supreme Court. But still, evictions were put on hold, and it cost landlords a lot of money. Nowadays, evictions are higher because people's credit and incomes are worse. So if you think about the real wages that somebody it earns, which is their wages and the wage increase after inflation is adjusted, real wages are down according to the St. Louis Fed since 2019 and 2020. So the average person earns less. And what they do have in savings is worth less because of inflation. Therefore, tenants have a harder time paying it. We've seen it here. I've seen it in my own properties. There's more evictions. There's more bad tenants these days. The cost of that goes into everybody's rents. One last factor that we're going to hit on here that's part of your rents going up are environmental regulations. In some states like California, they've outlawed gas stoves. They have mandated things that drive up your utility costs. They've shut down power plants. They have done an enormous amount of stuff in the name of climate change, which has made your rent higher. Your water heater, especially if it's a gas water heater, to replace the one that just broke is more expensive if you can get it. So maybe you have to put in an electric water heater and you have to wire for that. That's more expensive. If you want a gas stove, which is cheaper to install than an electric stove, you might not be able to get it. And electric bills are often paid by the tenant in the unit. But let's say you live in an apartment complex and you think, well, electric bill goes up, I, the tenant, pay it. Well, what about the parking lot lights and the lights in the common hallway and the overhead to manage your property? All of those utilities are paid by the landlord. They have to pay them. So if the electric bill goes up and you're paying the electric, it's not just you. And then water bills are up. Gas bills and heating bills are way up. And you can thank the people over at the EPA, you can thank the Biden administration, you can thank AOC and her Green New Deal. That is what they want. They want higher energy prices. They don't care because of the climate change kookery and the religion, the Marxist religion that is climate change. So when you say, hey man, I'm paying $1,000 in rent now for a one-bedroom apartment in Toledo, Ohio, and a couple years ago I could get this for $750. Don't blame the landlord. The landlord's just responding to the government and responding to market factors that have been driven by government policy that has driven these prices up over the last 4 or 5 years. Now, since there's a new administration, the Trump administration is going to come in and reverse a lot of these things and stop the bleeding. Rents are still going to be high. And when you want to complain about those rents, think about all the things that I just went over: interest rates, evictions, utility costs, material costs, repair costs, taxes, and insurance, because that's where the fault lies. So according to the Wall Street Journal, December 23rd, 2024, insurance and property taxes are now often more than the mortgage themselves. In September, 32% of a mortgage payment went to taxes and insurance, the highest rate ever recorded. In 5 metro areas, 25%, so 1 in 4 borrowers pay more than half of their payment in taxes and insurance. So like I said, taxes and insurance are way up. Now, let's say you're a retiree, you've paid off the mortgage, you have a little rental property. Most landlords have like 1 or 2 rental properties. Maybe it was in their family, or, they just bought a newer house and they're renting it out. They don't have any mortgage on it, but guess what? Taxes are way up, insurances are way up. T&I taxes and insurance makes up more than half of the mortgage payments for 9% of borrowers. That was 4% in 2014. That's a huge jump. And correspondingly, home sales are on pace for their worst year since 1995. So that is the effect of bad economic and bad government and bad Fed policy is your rent. So this has been Lad Dilgard from Stand and Speak. We hope you have learned a little bit. And the numbers vary. So if you have better numbers, put them in the comments section. Say, hey man, I found an article and this says that utilities are up this much since this date or whatever. I love that stuff. Put the data in there. Maybe you can correct me on something. But subscribe to this channel and comment on what you like, what you don't like, and share it with somebody. You can follow us on X @LadDilgard. But we hope you have a wonderful week and hang in there. Bye-bye.